Hello and welcome to Ex Cold Ed, the podcast where I share my experiences, thoughts and feelings after leaving the truth, otherwise known as the 2x2 way, the fellowship, the one true way. You get the picture. My hope is that in sharing this it will be cathartic for me and perhaps make you, dear listener, feel less alone if you've been through or are going through something similar. This is my story. So today's old episode from the original 4 that I made was when I discussed the rules and a bit about why I left the cult. So today I wanted to discuss some of the rules that we had in the religion. And I want to qualify that by saying that although these were rules, they were unwritten rules. It wasn't like when we joined the religion we were given a list of things that you should or shouldn't do. It was more that you were supposed to observe everybody else and just learn not to do certain things. Some of these rules have a basis in the Bible, but others I don't really know where they came from or why we did them. See, even though we tried our best to follow the Bible, the thing with this religion was that it was supposed to be your own personal relationship with God. You were supposed to do whatever God told you to do or whatever your conscience told you to do, because it was believed that God would speak through your conscience. If you had a guilty conscience, it was a sign that you were not in favor with God. With that being said, I'm going to jump into some of the rules. So one of them was no makeup, because makeup was seen as frivolous and worldly. Now the thing is that some people in the religion did wear makeup and others didn't. And those who did were seen as more worldly people within the religion. Those who didn't wear makeup were seen as more faithful or more pure. It wasn't like people would overtly say it, but it was just like a belief that people held underneath. It was kind of like you were either one of the cool worldly ones or you were one of the more faithful and true ones. No short hair or no hair hanging loose for women. Your hair had to be longer than shoulder length and it had to be in a ponytail or tied back in a bun. The opposite was true for men. They weren't supposed to have long hair. Men were supposed to look clean cut. No showing your shoulders or knees for women. Clothes were supposed to be modest, so no strapless dresses and no mini skirts. Again, some people in the religion chose to wear those sorts of clothes and they would be seen as more worldly. For me, whenever I wore a dress that didn't have proper sleeves, I would feel very worldly. I would feel very revealing and out there. And a lot of people did show their knees. The general rule was that you were supposed to be modest. No jewelry except wedding rings and watches. No TV in the home, although we could have computers. No radio in the home either. No swearing. And when I say swearing, I also include words like damn and crap and things like that, although it depended on your parents or your family and what they classified as swearing. But in general, language should be respectful. No participating in worldly activities such as dances, going to parties with alcohol. The more strict families also didn't allow their children to go on school camps. So obviously no alcohol, no smoking, no sex before marriage, no tattoos, no being gay or lesbian, no living with a partner before marriage, no going on a holiday with just you and your partner before marriage. Basically no staying overnight with your partner on your own before marriage. You know, just no doing basic things that normal worldly people find fun. Now you're probably thinking, what made people do these rules? Was there some crazy punishment if they didn't follow them? And here's the thing, there was no punishment. The only punishment would be shame. It would be like dishonor. Dishonor on you, dishonor on your family, dishonor on your cow. No, but really, it would be more like your conscience would eat away at you. You would feel like people were looking at you and talking about you. You would feel isolated from the religion. And generally, people wouldn't say anything because you're not supposed to judge other people. Occasionally, a worker might pull someone up on some of their behavior or something they're doing, but most of the time it would go unsaid and it would be more like hopefully God gets through to them, hopefully they realize that they're doing the wrong thing. The one thing I can think of that comes the closest to a punishment is if someone was divorced and then remarried, they were still allowed to attend the fellowship meetings but they could no longer take part. This means they could no longer pray or give their testimony in the fellowship meetings. I don't know if I'd really call that a punishment so much as more an example to other people not to do that behavior. But here's the thing, I didn't really feel like I was missing out as a child. I felt like I was saved from all these worldly things. Even though I was in this religion, I felt like I had a great childhood in many respects. I spent a lot of time outside, I used my imagination a lot, I had a lot of friends that I saw at least 3 times a week. And when I went to the missions, I felt like I was learning something. I felt like the preachers were teaching me things. I felt like no matter where I went in the world, I had family because everyone in the religion was like one big family, and if you went traveling, you would be put in contact with other workers and friends in those countries, so you always had connections. The one thing I would say that I wanted to do as a child that I couldn't would be breakdancing or rapping. I really wanted to play the drums, I really wanted to breakdance, and in the religion, dancing was seen as a frivolous thing that you don't really need to do. I guess the only thing that I would change if I could go back would be to join up to some dancing lessons and some drumming lessons. But on the whole, I felt part of something, and that felt warm and loving and protected. But that was as a child. As I got older, it also brought with it a lot of shame and guilt and feelings of isolation from my outside friends. I felt guilty for wanting to wear pants like other girls. So I should mention that wearing skirts or dresses was allowed for women, but wearing pants was not, because pants were seen as men's clothing, which was something I never really understood because those pants were made for women. I'm pretty sure a lot of men couldn't fit in those pants or do them up, so they kind of are women's clothing. But anyway, I felt guilty for having boyfriends who weren't in the religion. I felt clueless when I was at the stage where all my other friends were drinking alcohol and having sex, and I had no idea about any of that. I didn't know what cocktails were, I didn't know what it was like to be part of a pub atmosphere. I didn't know what it was like to go clubbing. I didn't even really know the difference between beer, vodka, whiskey, rum, nothing. I was completely clueless in that area. I never felt like I was good enough. I was always a sinner and there was always room for improvement. I felt shame whenever I wanted to question things or if I ever doubted things because clearly I didn't have enough faith. I felt guilty about not making enough time to read my Bible. I felt bad at the times when I found my Bible boring to read, because let me tell you, it's not the most interesting book on the shelf. And it's definitely not the most easy to read, especially the King James Version, because there's a lot of these and thous and so begat so, and begat means gave birth to, or like fathered. I felt ashamed when I couldn't focus on praying because my mind was too busy being filled with other things, such as worrying about the test I had to do tomorrow for school. And I also started feeling isolated within the religion. This was because my mum was a single mum, which some people looked down on. It was through no fault of her own. My father left us and cleaned out the bank accounts when I was 2, but some people didn't include us or thought we were beneath them because of it. It was like they thought being around us would make them catch whatever we had and drag them down to our level. My mum was such a lovely person. She was so kind and caring and so energetic and adventurous, and she never complained about anything. She also tried to organize a lot of things, but it was difficult when families had both a husband and a wife because then she felt that the husband would be bored because he had no one to talk to. I started to see a lot of hypocrisy within the church because we were supposed to be following this man, Jesus, who ate with sinners, who helped out the poor, who looked after the widows, yet some of the more posh or rich people in the religion or the families who had everything going their way didn't want to spend time with people like Mum and I. And I also saw this with other families who had single parents, that they were more ostracized within the religion. So that is point number 1. As I said in a previous podcast, I think I professed when I was around 10 and then I got baptized somewhere between 12 and 14. When I was around 16, I started asking a lot of questions. I had been told by the preachers that I shouldn't be studying psychology and philosophy at school because they believed it was airy-fairy. But I enjoyed questioning and critical thinking, and I thought that it was an important part of life and figuring out everything. There was a saying in the religion that faith begins where logic ends. There was also a hymn we used to sing that said, man's wisdom leads into a maze where error grows in bypath ways. The whole view of the religion was that man's logic or our logic is never enough. God is the one who's perfect. He's the one that sees the bigger picture and we're just part of that picture. So we just have to trust him that he knows best. So I had started questioning this and I had watched the behavior of my father and how my mother was having to live. And I just started questioning, how could a God who knows best allow someone who's so faithful to suffer so much? Why would a God let so many bad things happen to her? And why should she be condemned to a life of misery living on her own? Why would a God want to force a mother to be both a mother and a father to her child instead of finding that child a better father or just a father who would actually be there? So asking all these questions and thinking about these things, I decided to take a step back from the religion. I didn't live my life any differently. I just stopped attending the missions and the meetings. I didn't go out drinking and partying because I wasn't that way inclined. It was never something that really appealed to me. When I was in my mid-teens, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. It was around this time that my father decided it would be a great time to move back in with us. He also forced her to marry him, telling her that the workers had said that he could only go to heaven if they got married. He told me not to tell anybody about this marriage, and the only witnesses were his brother and his brother's wife. I felt that this was wrong, and I told some of my other relatives. During this time, my father was also treating my mother and myself very badly. He had forced my mother to move out of her bedroom and into another room where she had to walk a long way to get to the bathroom. This was horrible for me to watch, and so I reached out to friends and family asking if anybody could help. All of the people that I reached out to were in the religion. I reached out to my father's parents, and I reached out to my father's sister and her husband. I also reached out to my mother's brother and his wife, and my cousin and his wife. My cousins on my mum's side were the ones who came to be with me and to help me during this time. All of the other family members in the religion did nothing to help. I was also told by other people in the religion, both workers and ordinary members, that I should be nicer to my father, and nobody asked me if I was okay. Everyone was sure they were right, and I had no chance to tell my side of things. Even the workers in the religion were divided over the whole situation with my mother, my father, and myself. There were some workers who took my father's side and believed that I was a terrible child, and there were other workers who actually took the time to speak to me and spend time with me. But just seeing this conflict made the religion feel like an unsafe place for me. During this time in my life, my only safe place was at school, so I would spend a lot of time just being at school with people who I felt were my real support. It was only my school friends and their parents and some of my school teachers who had any idea of what was going on, and some of my school friends even made food for me and bought me food when I was at the hospital. I found during that time that my biggest support were people outside the religion, and the most compassion I saw was from my school friends, ones who were religious and ones who weren't, but all who weren't in my religion. Even when Mum was dying of cancer, I had people in the religion saying that it was my fault for leaving the religion that brought this on. I saw a lot more love and compassion in my family members who were outside the church than I saw in those who were within it. After my mum died, I was told by the mother of my cousins that if I left South Australia, I would never be welcome back there again. I left anyway, and I've only spoken to them once since then when I went back to visit them when I was 18. I spent a lot of time battling with this when I was in the religion, because you're not supposed to have any war between you and your brothers and sisters, and especially not your own family. I tried sending them text messages asking if they would speak with me about whatever it was that was the issue between us, so then we could sort it out like Jesus would, but I got no reply. I questioned why those in the religion were more judgmental than those outside it, and I wondered why I was spending so much time trying to mend bridges with people when I didn't understand why they were breaking in the first place. I had left the religion for a short period when I was 16, but I didn't think that warranted being shunned by my own family. I felt very confused about the whole thing. I made new friends in the religion when I moved to Victoria, and I had some good friendships, but I still felt like I was missing some real connection and close friends. I felt like I connected more with people outside the religion. Where I lived in Victoria, there were a lot of families who were related to each other, so it was difficult to be included when you're an introvert like me. They're all lovely people, but I'm not one to put myself out there and to push myself into other people's groups, so I withdrew even more into myself. I stopped attending meetings and I started asking more questions. I started feeling really guilty for not attending meetings because that's what I was supposed to do, but I also couldn't bring myself to lie and pretend that I was loving the religion. I moved to Melbourne for study and I couldn't really make friends there, either in the religion or outside of it. I was invited to things by my dorm mates at uni, but I didn't go because they were worldly events like going to the movies and I wasn't supposed to do that. So I spent 9 months cooped up in my tiny room focusing on study, until eventually it got too much and I had to stop. So I dropped out of my course and I got married at the end of that year to an amazing person. He was studying to be a doctor, so I spent the next few years following him around the place as he did his studies. But in the process, I lost myself even more. I used to be super academic and a competitive person. I wanted to be the best at everything and I wanted to do something that changed the world. And then I got married and became a housewife. And even worse for me, and through no fault of his own, my partner was a very intelligent, kind doctor. Everyone looked up to him and I felt very overlooked and in his shadow. That wasn't anything to do with the religion and that was a me issue, but it didn't help when coupled with the guilt I felt for not being good enough in the religion and not having a close social network to be around. The part that had very much to do with the religion, though, was that we both got married very young. I was 20 and he was 21, and we had only known each other for maybe 2 years. Normally in a relationship, you wouldn't need to get married so early, but the rules of the religion stating that we couldn't live together until we were married forced that situation on us, mainly because I was super depressed living on my own in Melbourne and he lived some hours away, so it was really hard to see each other without becoming exhausted. The only real solution was to get married. Being a housewife, I also didn't have work colleagues I could be friends with, and I still didn't really form close friendships within the religion. I started feeling extremely lonely and that I didn't really have a purpose in life. I thought about having children, but we weren't ready for that yet. In addition to that, him being a doctor meant that he worked long hours and he didn't have a lot of time at the end of the day to spend with me. So I spent my days cooking, reading books, and playing computer games and waiting for my husband to come home. I joined a gym and I started going to classes and doing a lot of swimming, which did help my mood, but I still felt very isolated and I felt like I didn't have a good support network. Like Victoria in the new Cats movie, all that I wanted was to be wanted. And I didn't feel super wanted. I felt like an oddball. I didn't quite fit with everyone in the religion, and I definitely didn't fit with those in the world, the outsiders. I think the last straw really was when my grandma died. I lived close by to her nursing home, and the staff phoned my uncle who lived out on the farm, and he went in and was with her when she died. Afterwards, he called my husband who came home from work and told me, and I was so upset that I hadn't been told earlier and I wasn't able to be with her. Grandma was my last connection to mum. I used to go there and play the piano for her, and just before she died, I'd been finding her new dresses. I recently got her a colourful one and she was so happy with it, and I'd promised to go back and visit her and see her in it, and I never got to. I only got to see her in it at her funeral. The aftermath of Grandma's death completely destroyed me. I didn't care about her will, which I never got to see, but all I wanted was her photographs, her diaries, and her letters that she kept from mum. These were my last connections to mum, and they were snippets of our lives together that had been shared with her by mum. Her old diaries had things about mum in them, and if I didn't get to keep them, I just wanted to read them. I also wanted Grandma's Bible. I did tell this to my uncle and his wife, and they said I would be able to see them after the probate had been granted on the will. I never heard back from them. I wish I had have kept her diaries instead of loading them into their car, but now I'll never have that connection, and I felt I lost so much that day. I felt so alone in my grief of losing Grandma. I called my uncle and his wife to ask if I could be with them, but they said no because they were busy meeting with the workers to arrange her funeral. I didn't understand why I couldn't represent mum in these things and be part of organising the funeral. I felt upset that I couldn't be a pallbearer at her funeral, but my husband was instead. I felt upset that I never even got to read her will, but most of all, I was upset that I had lost the last final connection I had with mum, and I had nothing sentimental to hold or read from it. I didn't have Grandma's diaries with stories about mum in them. I didn't have the photos of us that mum sent her. I had nothing to hold on to. And worst of all, I had no grandma to tell me stories about mum, or to just be there as a living connection to mum. This was one of the lowest points in my life, and I withdrew even more from the religion and my husband. I couldn't understand how a God could let these things happen. I couldn't understand how godly people could treat me this way. My husband's family were strong in the religion, and they are lovely people. I couldn't ask him to leave the religion with me, and I couldn't stay with him and be around people from the religion. I couldn't deal with that constant guilt and shame, and I couldn't deal with one more person who was supposed to be my family shunting me aside like I didn't matter. Divorce is not allowed in that religion, so I didn't know how to get out. I didn't want to leave my husband because I didn't want to condemn him to a life of living alone. I felt I couldn't live with that guilt, but I also didn't want to pretend anymore. I just couldn't. I had made a good friend playing computer games online, and although we'd never met, he had given me some hope about life again. He had encouraged me to try skateboarding, which gave me a sense of achievement. His passion for life made me feel even worse in my situation, because I didn't have that sort of future ahead of me. I felt like I was looking into a black hole of loneliness and emptiness and guilt. So I decided one day that the only way out was death. That way, my husband would be able to marry again, and he would be happy, and I wouldn't have to feel that extreme loneliness and loss and shame and abandonment anymore. I decided that I would like to lay myself to rest at the farm where Mum had grown up. I told my husband that I had made a new friend and that he had been giving me a new purpose in life. I told him that this friend had been a support to me through recent days, and I also told my husband that I was going out to the farm. I asked my gamer friend for his number, and on the way out to the farm I called him, basically to say goodbye. He told me to drive to the other side of Australia and he would buy me a Mrs. Mac pie. I didn't think I'd had a Mrs. Mac pie before, so I said I would like that. And just like that, I saw another way out. I turned around and I told my husband I wanted to meet this other person, so I flew to Vietnam and I met him. We got on really well, and being with him I was happy and free for the first time in as long as I could remember. There was nobody looking down on me and making me feel ashamed. The world was this whole big open place of new things to try. I could wear whatever clothes I wanted to and not feel guilty or constricted. There were things I wanted to do and places I wanted to see, and I could see a future with him. The period after that was a horrible time of guilt for myself and confusion for everyone involved. I spent a long time fighting with myself about whether I should start a new life where I might be happy, or whether I should go back to my old life where I could only see depression and isolation and not feeling good about myself at all and not having a future I could look forward to. It took some months and none of us really knew what I wanted, not even myself. But in the end I made a decision, and it was the most difficult decision I've made. My husband in the religion was, and I'm sure still is, an amazing person. He reminded me a lot of my mum, and I knew she would have loved him. He was kind, he was caring, and he was smart. His family were kind to me, and it was very hard to break their hearts as well. But the most difficult thing to do was to see him upset. I felt like a horrible person, and my new partner had to deal with countless nights of me crying about what an awful person I was for making another person feel so sad. So that's why I left the religion. It was a mixture of the weight of the religion and the weight of my own life situation and experiences that pushed me into a hole that I had a lot of trouble climbing out of. But I'm finally here. I would say that there is more to every story, and obviously there's a lot more to my story. At the end of the day, my main issues with the religion were the fact that there was a lot of rules that I couldn't really understand why a God would care about those things. Like, why does a God care if you wear pants or a skirt? Why does he care if you wear a necklace? How does God see a necklace different to a wedding ring? And why would a God care about the length of my hair? There's just a lot of things that are there to make you feel bad about yourself, but you don't really know why. There's things that you shouldn't do just because the religion says you shouldn't. My other big issue with the religion was that I was finding a lot more kindness outside the religion than I was inside. At the state I was in, at the stage of my life I was in, what I mostly needed was kindness. I think we all have a point in our lives where we need other people, we need support, and we need kindness. And that was the biggest contradiction of all, that we were supposed to be following Jesus, this person who ate with sinners, who forgave everybody, who healed the sick. And yet, instead, we were living this life of trying to appear spiritual, trying to appear happy. And I think in some cases that caused people to be more judgmental and less sympathetic towards others. In general, I wouldn't say that it was a bad religion. I also wouldn't say that it was a good religion. I would just say that it was a religion, because for many people in it, it's serving a purpose. It's giving them a purpose in life. It's giving them a hope for life after this life. So following the religion, it can take away fear of death. Also, a lot of people in the religion are upright and honest people in society generally because of the belief that we shouldn't lie and that we should do the right thing by others. I would say the preachers in the religion are very dedicated and lovely people on the whole. And I would say that there are some very lovely, good people in the religion. But I do believe that a lot of people are so caught up with trying to serve God and be good people themselves that they're not seeing what they can do to help other people around them. It's this weird irony of people wanting to be godly and wanting to serve God and follow Jesus, but being so focused on that they're actually not living the way that Jesus lived. I think sometimes when you're trying so hard to do something, you can get lost in it and not be actually doing what it is you think you're doing, if that makes sense. I wouldn't change my past because my past is what made me who I am today. And everything that's happened up until now is what has brought me to this moment, to where I am in my life right now. And I don't want that to be different. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate you. If you'd like to reach out, ask any questions, vent, say whatever you need to say, even if that's getting annoyed about something I've said, email me at exculted@gmail.com. That's exculted@gmail.com. And always remember, you can walk your own way, speak your own truth, and live your own life. Bye!